speak to the motion?
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're encouraged to.
I appreciate the opportunity to table the motion and make this representation right now because it is germane to how Canadians are experiencing everything from the cost of living, but also to economic fairness, and I would also argue privacy. So the motion, I'm open to amendments if there is consideration of improving the motion. No motion is perfect, so it definitely, if there's interest to follow through on this, it can actually be more specific in terms of certain aspects or highlight other things. I noted in our previous debate about some of the work in the past I've tried with credit cards. There have been some effective measures that have taken place. We've been able to shame them into practices that are more consistent with other countries. And so my hope is to have some type of a focus here in this committee because it's going to take more than just one individual member of Parliament out there, regardless of political affiliation, to actually bring some fairness and accountability. And I'll conclude with this, because I am really sincere and about the approach of this, is that Australia actually has an entirely different process than Canada, where there's regulation in terms of the interest that they can apply and also the interest that they can change on consumers. And it's just one model that's out there, and it's different than what we experience here. In fact, their rates are significantly lower. And then on top of that, Mr. Chair, I want to conclude with this. We all just think about the major credit cards right now in terms of, the Visa, the MasterCards, the ones that you pull out of your wallet on a regular basis. But there's also credit fees and credit cards that go upwards of 30%. They can be from furniture stores and other places where you go to get financing from. And that is absolutely unacceptable. It's often to induce people to pay zero interest now and then set them up for failure later on and put them at rates that are just absolutely nothing more than obscene and theft, especially upon working class people. And they sets them up into a purchasing point, and in terms of seducing them to thinking that, yes, you can get your new washing machine, and you can get your new fridge, and you can get your different things and not have to pay for a full year. But later on, when it comes due, and if in that time somebody's lost a job, somebody's gotten sick, or so forth, and their income of the family has changed, they're then stuck with a 30 to 40 sometimes percent interest rate on some of these things and purchases that they've made. So for all those different reasons, I'm hoping we can shed a little bit of light on this and get some relief for Canadian consumers. And I don't want to take a lot of the committee's time with this, but I think that if we scope it, we can actually get some really good results, and I'm hoping that I get the support of my colleagues because I have in the past had brought fraud issues here to this table, and this is similar to that vein. And I haven't asked for a lot at this committee with regards to time. I've been very respectful about the agendas of those that have brought their things forward. I'm really just eager to get at this because I don't know how long this Parliament lasts. It could last another year. It could last another day. I don't know. But all I know is that these rates are going to continue to be a burden on people, and it's about time that they actually had some accountability in this place. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the committee for its time.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. J'ai Monsieur Aria.
Thank you, Mr. Massey.
I'm not talking about the content of this motion, but
it's a good one. Yeah.
On the list
Yes,
now.
I'm sorry, Mr. Aria, I missed the order, so you're correct, MP Rempel-Garner.
Merci,
Sorry.
Chair. Pas de problème.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
So just to build on what Mr. Massey said, colleagues, if you look at the total consumer debt of Canadians, it has rapidly and exponentially grown, particularly over the last 10 years. The debt-to-disposable income ratio of most Canadians it's now, I think, a record. It's almost 200%, and it's particularly acute within Gen Z. Many Gen Z Canadians are living entirely on their credit cards, loaded with student debt, can't pay rent. So we're now in a situation where Canadians are forced to live on their credit cards more. And with I think the motion characterizes the uses the term predatory lending practices. I would have to agree. There's some predatory lending practices in here. So given how many Canadians are now living on their credit cards due to inflation, high tax burden, the housing crisis, I think it is very incumbent upon this committee to look at the structure of how government allows lenders to profit on the backs of those Canadians. Again, and I would just add, particularly given the changes in Canada's mortgage rules announced by the government last week, the changes in the mortgage rules will add, exponentially add to the Canadian debt load over the next 30 years. That change, I think, history will look back on it as a fundamental transformation on generational debt. Just as an aside, Chair, the fact that the finance minister was like, this is the best thing ever. I'm like, for banks. It was the best thing ever for banks. And it's just, I'll just say this, it's truly been remarkable to watch the Liberal Party become the party of the banks. So I fully support this motion. I look forward to litigating how much money the Canadian government should be allowing credit card companies to make off the backs of Canadians that they're forcing to pay double the cost for housing, more for everything, and giddy up. I love this motion. Let's do it.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Arya, la parole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arya, you have the floor.
I don't have any issues with the content of the motion, but the motion itself, is it relevant to our committee? Is it not the finance committee that should deal with this?
It's this one, 100%. Yep, 100%.
Monsieur Arya, je laisserai peut-être la parole à Monsieur Massé, si vous...
Mr. Arya, I might give Mr. Massé the floor if he'd like to respond.
Thank you, and I do appreciate that, and that's and it's actually a fair question, because we do have at times our committee overlap everything, but this is an industry issue because it's across the board, and it also involves regulation, and it's not just percentages. It also involves the privacy commissioner and so forth. So I do appreciate that. But what happens sometimes in this place, and I've seen this at industry committee, is some stuff gets punted over to finance, where then later on it doesn't get the coverage it needs, especially when they have budgets and other things, and it's seen as just that as a numbers issue. But this, to me, is a broad range industry abuse that's taking place. And it's a competition issue, which is also the Competition Bureau, and that's how I pushed it before with the Capital One issue, is I wrote the Competition Commissioner for that. So for those reasons, I believe it's in-house for us to deal with. And we have kind of dealt with some of those things before. We had the first one of your studies, Mr. Chair, with regards to financing and so forth. We have had that before. We've touched on these things that have led to other committees kind of copycatting us later on. So if somebody wants to copycat us later on in this, I'm okay with that. But I really believe it's industry-wide. And so I thank the member for that. But the Competition Bureau, the Privacy Commissioner, and industry-wide is why it belongs in-house here.
Thank you, MP Massé. MP Arya, were you, was that all, MP Arya? I think so, yeah. Okay, thank you. Monsieur Généreux.
C'est au tour de Monsieur Généreux.
Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with this motion, not only for consumers, but also for small and medium-sized businesses. We've had the opportunity over the last few years to hear from the chambers of commerce across the country and on the issue of credit card fees and the penalties as well. So this has been a reality for many years, that the competitiveness of small and medium-sized businesses is at risk, and I entirely agree with this motion. Thank you very much. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Massey, for giving notice of this on Monday and then for tabling it today. I won't prolong the discussion other than to say we agree with it. As we said, I think this has been given short shrift, and as you say, Finance Committee, everybody says put stuff at Finance Committee, and then Finance Committee has 52 pre-budget consultation meetings and nothing can wedge in between, and that's important work. So, but I would like to propose an amendment to the motion, and the amendment would be leave everything there that is and add at the end, so where it ends, the last sentence ends, consumer advocacy groups and representatives from credit card industry, a new sentence, and that the committee begin consideration of this study within 14 days following the adoption of this motion.
Okay, so we've got an amendment proposed by MP Perkins, so we'll first deal with the amendment.
And I think we may have circulated. Did we? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Do we have any speakers on the amendment, or I have Mr. Patzer on the amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I just want to thank my colleague for that proposal. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Just, as Mr. Massey said, this Parliament could go one day, it could go 1 year, and I think in the interest, because I think every one of us has received the heartbreaking emails and phone calls of people who have been either evicted from their apartment, or they've defaulted on their mortgage, or they're defaulted on their credit cards. We've all had those emails. We've had those heartbreaking stories, right? So I do think the urgency is required. So I thank Mr. Perkins for this suggestion. I think this committee should jump to it as soon as it is able to.
I have on the amendment MP Area.
My concern with that 14 days is that in case the current issue that we are supposed to discuss today, the Bill C-27, if it doesn't get done within 14 days, it means that it will get further postponed. So if there's any way we can say that this can be taken up 14 days after the conclusion of the current things that the committee is dealing with.
Thank you, MP Area. On the amendment, I have Monsieur Garon.
Mr. Garon on the amendment. Look, I agree entirely with the text of the motion as drafted. This is a problem that costs Quebecers a lot, and they care about it. And the consumer protection parts are something that we really need to take the initiative to study. So I salute my colleague for taking this initiative. I think it's really important. Now, I would tend to be against the amendment for the following reason. We don't have a lot of time. We've said that already. And we are going to have to work on the agenda to do this soon. But I'm wondering how we do things. I'm not convinced that tabling motions like this with very little notice saying that we need to do this next week or for X number of meetings. I think if we work in this way, the deadlines are going to pile up and it's going to become difficult to control. So I'm against the amendment for the following reason. I think we need to have a subcommittee meeting to discuss the agenda of the meetings, about meetings, and I think we have to agree on the rules. I even think it's possible, depending on the conversations that we've had over C-27, that it's possible that we need to take a break from it to find solutions to certain difficulties. So this study could perhaps be inserted at that time to allow us to have discussions on C-27. But honestly, I think we need a subcommittee meeting to discuss the agenda, and I don't want my colleague to believe that I'm not in a hurry to do this, but I just think this is not the appropriate way of doing this, to putting it in with very short notice. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I have Mr. Turnbull.
I have to say I've just been listening to the debate here. I tend to agree with Mr. Garon on this particular amendment. I do think there's merit to Mr. Massey. I think there's merit to this study. I think predatory lending is something that our government has put in Budget 2024. Installment loans, for example, are the second highest form of debt that's growing. The Canadians have, and we limited the max rate for charges. We also included financial literacy organizational funding in the last budget. I'm really sorry that the Conservatives didn't support that budget. I was on Finance Committee when we had quite a lot of pushback from the Conservative Party who didn't support those things. But it's good to hear that they're changing their tune here today and are willing to support a study into this matter. So I think it's great. I think it would be great to work out the timeline and schedule in a subcommittee meeting, and so for that reason, I think it would be great not to have the amendment adopted. So I will be voting against. But I do think there's merit to the study, and I think we could work it into the schedule. Thanks.
Merci, Monsieur Turnbull. Monsieur Massey.
Chair, and I actually do appreciate those sentiments. However, I'm going to support the amendment because I want to get something going. And I guess the amendment to me, and I am listening to what both my colleagues, and I believe they both want to have this work done. So that's not the here's what I think with the motion, though, is that it leaves the chair with discretion about how much time and how we actually coordinate C27 and what happens next. And I'm totally have confidence in the chair to be able to judge that. So I support the motion just because it doesn't tell the chair specifically how many meetings, how much time, and so forth, but he's going to get basically the airplane off the runway on it. That's kind of the way I view it. So I really do respect what we've heard from my two previous colleagues about this, and then them sending it to committee is not to defer or so forth. It is the usual practice for this. I'd just rather deal with this right now than scheduling another meeting with interpreters and all the different things, and then all that different stuff that goes on, and then leave it in the chair's hands in terms of within the next couple of weeks starting to get something going on it. And you won't hear me complaining whether it's I'm not expecting that meeting to circumvent everything else that's taking place here when we do get to C27 and try to deal with the tribunal issue, which I think is really important, because if we can resolve that somehow at this table, then I think actually, quite frankly, we should be splitting C27 and sending it off to the Senate, the privacy component, and then deciding on the other AI stuff as we go forward, so we can get them working on this bill. That's just my personal preference right now. So I'm going to support the amendment, but it's because I think the amendment, and I think it's crafted this way, is to give the chair the ability to be able to do the scheduling necessary that won't deviate us entirely off of our duty here. And then at the same time, we'll at least show the Canadians, and it'll be interesting to see the reaction by the credit card industry once they know that we're zeroing in on this issue. I'm sure there's going to be some activity right now. Ironically, I actually have a meeting coming up with the bankers after this. Yeah, I see some nods there. They're lobbying on the Hill. So at any rate, I think that in itself is really important, that they know that there is, from the Bloc Québécois, the Liberals and the Conservatives, and ourselves, a seriousness with regards to consumer debt and what's taking place. So for those reasons, I'll support the amendment and leave it in your capable hands in determining how we proceed with the business at this table.
Okay, before I turn it over to MP Perkins, even though my opinion is of no importance because I just channel the will of the committee, whatever happens with the amendment, Mr. Massey, I'm very sympathetic to this motion, and I think Mr. Garon's suggestion to use that study sometimes to fill in the gaps when we are, in a dead end on C27. I think that's useful. So whatever happens, I think we'll get it going sooner rather than later. So, Mr. Perkins.
Chair, that was the intent of the amendment to the motion, which was to give the chair the ability to pick, and obviously we'd need some time. The clerk and the table would need some time to get witnesses lined to the start of the study, and it gives that flexibility. And I think given the record credit card debt rates, record debt rates Canadians are facing, that this is an appropriate time for us to do it. And again, I'll say, I think this is real work, and I live in fear, Mr. Chair, that what we're going to have is another 5 meetings of Liberal filibustering on CPC 9. And we're at an impasse on that right now. It seems many of us on this committee don't like the tribunal idea, and obviously the government is sticking with it. So in the absence of the ability to solve that and sit here for another 5 meetings listening to a Liberal filibuster, I think the government can go off and try and figure out what it is they want to do and come back with some sort of compromise, or this bill's going to be stuck here for a long time, and we're going to be listening to a long, long filibuster. And there are significant things in this bill that are of importance, and there are significant changes that need to be made besides this particular issue, including concerns around Clause 18 and legitimate interest. So we need to make sure that we're using the best use of committee time. And to me right now, given the concerns of Canadians on the cost of living and the debt levels, getting to this level is, or this study right now is important. And I think what we'll end up with if we relegate this, as MP Garon says, to the subcommittee, that we're going to end up with an impasse there on the timing issue, and we'll end up debating this again here in this committee, because I don't think 4 people on the subcommittee are going to, I can pretty much predict where the votes are going to go. So I think we better solve this issue, but when we start this now, and in this committee, in the full committee, because it's going to end up here anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. So I have no other speakers on the amendment proposed by yourself, Mr. Perkins, so I will call it to a vote. Madam Clerk.
Let's see. Mr. Turnbull.
Against.
Mr. Aria. No. Mr. Badaway. No. Mr. Gahir.
No.
Mr. Van Bynen.
No.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Monsieur Genereux. Yes. Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Gardner.
Yes.
Monsieur Garon.
No.
Mr. Massey.
Oui.
Okay, so the amendment is defeated, and we're back to the main motion, and I had on my list Monsieur Garon and then Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I've already said what I think. I'm not going to repeat myself. It's an important issue, I believe. It's a set of important issues. And whatever Mr. Perkins says, I support the motion, and I think we should begin the study soon. I think that Mr. Massey and I discussed this, and he understands it very well. Having said that, I'd like to move a sub-amendment, Mr. Chairman, that would read as follows. After point F, we would add a G saying, and the practices tied to interchange rates and their effect on the prices charged to consumers and their effect on merchants. Yes, thank you, Mr. Garon. Was this sent? Could you repeat it? I'll say it slowly. The practices tied to interchange rates and their effects on the viability of merchants and the prices charged to consumers. And if I may say a few words about it, I think that it's consensual, really. From one pre-budget consultation to the next, the retailers have often spoken about this problem. The federal regulations on interchange rates are federal, and this is what the credit card companies charge merchants. And obviously, it has an effect on the viability of these small businesses. They're quite unfair and unequal, and they're also fed back to consumers, including those who don't use their credit cards, because obviously it becomes part of the general prices of these businesses. And I know Mr. Massey is very sensitive to this, and Mr. Généreux alluded to this earlier as well. So I think that this can very easily be part of the main motion. Are there any comments on the amendment moved by Mr. Garon? Do I have the consent of all to include G in the motion? Thank you. Wonderful. So that brings us to the main motion. Mr. Garon, did you have anything to add to the motion as such? Mr. Turnbull.
To say, let's go to a vote.
Okay, so on the motion as amended, I don't think that there is a need for a vote. I see there is unanimous consent of committee members, so the motion is adopted. Merci, Monsieur Massé.